So, and I've managed to start without the recording. So welcome everybody, and welcome to those behind the scenes who are watching the recording later. And yeah, and we were just asked, do you already have a copy of my book, or are you along for the interest? And that's all, everybody is welcome. So a little bit about me for starters is that I started with doing a zoology degree, having spent a childhood running everywhere and jumping everywhere and dancing, and wasn't good enough to be a professional dancer. So I did a zoology degree. And I was always keen on the living animals. The minute it was dead, I wasn't interested anymore. I wanted to know about behavior and movement, and didn't at that point know why. And then I started a PhD, and it was absolutely wrong for me, and my back seized up, and that took me to my first lessons. And I ended up getting out of science, fell out with it at the time. And my first teachers were Carrington teachers, lots of gentle unwinding and very beautiful work, quite silent, not very much tuition, but took me out of the crisis and made me realize this is what I wanted to do. And then I moved to London to sit on school doorsteps to try and get a place, because they were much competed for in those days, and ended up at Misha's school at one of the McDonald trainings, Misha Magidoff, because I loved the life there. It was lots of play, and Misha gave you lots of confidence and lots of exploration and lots of movement. And I put on half a stone of muscle in the first term on my back. I was putting on weight, and everyone was telling me I was slimmer, and I realized it was muscle on my back. You know, it was because McDonald works pretty powerful stuff, up, down, up, down, up, down, for those who know the McDonald side of things. And then I finished training, and within 6 months I'd fallen apart, because none of my lovely teachers or trainee or trainers had actually equipped me with how to look after myself in a way that worked for me. And I had no idea how to keep it together. So that's what took me to Miss Goldie. Does anyone not know who Miss Goldie is? Everybody knows, good. So she lost no time in telling me I was a mess. And one of her favorite things to say to me was, "You ask me that? And you call yourself a teacher of the Alexander technique? Why, Mr. Alexander would be turning in his grave if he could see what you were doing in the name of his technique," which is not what I would ever say to a young teacher. Goldie was like that. She was known for it. And fortunately, through various circumstances, I'd already learned how to put what I called my magic raincoat on when people threw stuff at me that I was clear wasn't mine, and instead to listen to what the information was that was being delivered that was for me. And the information for me was, you're a mess. Yep, I'll get that. And you don't know anywhere near as much as you think you do. And I can sort you. And I thought, well, that's fine. I can take that. So I magic raincoated all the insults and survived her, which a lot of people didn't. And she was amazing. But the first thing she did was my lovely strong back, she realized was a bit of a fix around the solar plexus, and she collapsed it. And I was back in a slump for the first time in 6 years, which was rather a shock. And it's like she stripped away everything I'd learned, everything of my training, and she started rebuilding it like she wanted. And it was totally different. She brought me to quiet and taught me how to calm my system to a deeper level than anyone had ever done, which was amazing. But she also rebuilt me physically in a different way. She was doing different moves, different procedures with me than I'd ever encountered. She was doing these incredibly strong pulls that sort of did different things with my shoulders and different things with my arms. And she was connecting me rather than taking me apart. There wasn't any release. It was all about connection. And I had no idea how it was different. All I knew was that when I could finally sit up again after 6 months, it was stronger. It was, I mean, now I would say she built me from the core. It was much more from the core that she built me. All I knew was that I felt very much more strong. I had a coordination to my arms, particularly I'd never had before. There was a lightness of being and a quietness there were things I'd never found. And it was very different. So one of the key moments that happened after lesson 6, where she challenged me that I hadn't actually started to think for myself, which was a new concept, think for myself. Nobody's ever asked me to do that. At home, away from the technique. And so that night I thought, well, I'm going to show her I can do this. And I stood in front of my kettle. And instead of just grabbing the kettle, I stopped and came present to myself and came to this quiet place, bringing my mind to the brain, as she called it. So I was not interfering in my body. And then I just gave consent to my hand to move. And it just moved to the kettle. And it was completely different. Not merely did my body move in a way that it had never moved before, but I was now in relationship to my kettle. And this was a total aha moment. And it was a life-changing moment, really. I went back the following week and told her all about it, but I didn't have to. She already knew that I'd begun to do the work. And so I worked with her for 4 years. And that kettle process, as I call it, that's what she really wanted me to discover, because it's Alexander's own discovery process. And one of the things she was keen to get across was that the training courses, excellent as they are, and without them we wouldn't all be here, actually have turned the technique on its head, so that we learn how to bring about the primary control, and then we pick up our kettle. We do the neck free, head forward, neck back, lengthen and widen. And then we keep all that going while we pick up the kettle. And to her, it was actually the other way up, that you came to quiet and you moved to the kettle out of this quiet, so that your nervous system actually self-organizes your body, and you rediscover primary control all over again. And her point was that Alexander, in everything he did, was actually making an alive discovery in that moment. And that was just such a different way of seeing it all. Because I'd been asking the question from the beginning, how did Alexander develop the technique? Because, we all trotted along to a teacher and had hands put on us, but nobody did that for him. And I remember asking it in one of the training schools I visited of one of the heads of training, and she said, well, Alexander was a terribly clever man. We can't do that. And I thought, fudge, you don't know. So now I had an inkling of what actually he had done to discover the technique. So that all launched me on a 30-year journey to discover what it was that she was doing that was so different, to understand it. I'm able to describe it now in language that I couldn't have described it then. And that took me to a lot of different people along the way, of course. The first person it took me to was back to John Hunter, if anyone knows him, in London, who was actually the first, he was the main assistant on my training course, and he was why I went to Goldie in the first place. Beautiful, quiet work John has. And he was doing a set of workshops at the time because he was asking the same question, what was Goldie doing? And he'd already he'd also found Erica Whitaker. And so he was also teaching us some of what Erica taught him. And then I went to work with Erica directly. And there was a lot about, again, how to let your eyes self-organize movement, not that she put it in that language. I was already working with Bates. I then found Peter Grunwald, because to me, the eyes are a tremendous organizer of the primary control. I don't know whether anyone else has discovered that along the way. Then I discovered Bob Britton and functional anatomy. Hi, Catherine. And on your train. And Bob Britton introduced me to functional anatomy, because I'd always been really bored by anatomy. This muscle does this, and this one does this, and this one does this. Itsy bitsy, it doesn't join up. It didn't mean anything. And functional anatomy joins things up. And that suddenly anatomy came alive for me. Jessica Wolfe, I was already working with natural breathing as a result of John's work. And then Jessica Wolfe, of course, is doing great work bringing natural breathing back into the technique. Craniosacral therapy I did for a while, which introduced me to the world of fascia, and tensegrity, which again, I think is such an important concept for our work, along with biomechanics, as long as one doesn't take the physics of the tensegrity, which is all wrong, as Patrick Johnson tells us. But tensegrity, I think, is a very important concept of how everything joins to everything else, because, you know, that's something we're really working with. And I discovered Myers anatomy trains, if anyone knows those, which again is putting that functional anatomy into into muscle trains that you can work with. Andre, can you hear me well enough? Do you need me to speak up?
Yeah, it's not bad.
Okay. Is everybody else okay? Is anyone else struggling to hear me? I'll just raise my voice a bit.
No, please don't do that.
I have tinnitus, and so actually what would really help me is if you could speak a little slower.
Thank you. Okay, I'll do that.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome. So, yes, where did I get to? Myers and myofascial trains. And then the last major input was a man called Philip Shepherd, if anyone's come across him. And he works with deep embodiment. And he says, you know, how come we're still saying, I look after my body, I'm looking after my back? We are the body. We're still using divisive language. We need to be using whole language for ourselves. And he works a lot with really exploring the intelligence of the body, which is something Miss Goldie would talk about, is having intelligent knees. And that came from Alexander. They were aware of bringing the whole body intelligent. So that put that piece of the puzzle in. So all these various different threads all linked back to Miss Goldie's work and explained a little bit of the jigsaw, but there was still something missing. I moved to Ireland in 2005 and fell very ill. I had a real burnout and I was bedbound for over a year, housebound, bedbound, and very weak at the end of it. And so all that strength and vibrancy that Goldie had brought in me was lost. There'd been another episode a few years before as well, but not as bad. And so when this episode finished in about 2008, I really had to set about, and I cleared the chronic fatigue that had dogged me since I was 17. And I set about rebuilding the strength. And I did I did very gentle yoga to start with, and gentle swimming, and slowly built up. And it was an incredibly slow process. And I wasn't finding that strength that Miss Goldie had. I could find the quiet, and I was doing the kettle thing, thinking, well, how does the strength come out of that? And it wasn't turning up. And then I was told about the work of Jando Masuero. If anyone's heard of him, has anyone worked with Jando? He's a French teacher, and was asking the same questions as me. How did Alexander develop this work? But he is an engineer and a mathematician. So he looked more at the biomechanical side, and he's very logical. So he was into constructive conscious control. And my first lesson with him, he used these incredibly strong pulls that I was to do for myself over the internet. He talked me through how to use constructive conscious control to give myself a pull to the elbow. And it was weird. It was like nothing I'd ever done before. And he was expecting me to walk out on him, because most senior teachers say, this isn't Alexander, and they get out. And I realized that what he was doing was exactly what Goldie had done for me. And so I thought, he's onto something here. And I worked with him for a year and learned a lot about what Goldie's biomechanics were. I really do think he's hit something here, that he's found Alexander's biomechanics, which actually are quite different to what we tend to think of nowadays as the alignment of the body. And I rebuilt my strength. And within not very long, I could do all the core testers that my daughter had showed me that I couldn't do. And I was springing around like a 6-year-old. And it's fantastic, you know, having not been able to walk for 3 years at twice, you know, to get my full vitality back was amazing. So you can hear I'm still excited about it. So there was the missing link. And I matched them with the anatomy trains. I discovered how to link them into the core muscles, how to link it to the breathing, how to link it to the discovery process. And I also started to ask, and what's the science behind it? Because Alex Goldie's work was so precise. And I thought there's got to be a very clear scientific process behind this. So I started reading neurophysiology. I read biomechanics, which is tough going. The science background suddenly turned out to be useful after all. And I started to write the book. And that was 4 years out of my life writing it. And it's all come together as a sort of a whole package of my model of how the Alexander technique works. Andre, you have a question.
Yeah, would you mind if I take you just half a step back to this rebuilding the strengths process? Could you elaborate on that a little bit more?
Yes, so a lot of the technique, certainly as I had experienced it, used the word release a lot, you know, like on a table. And now give me the weight of your arm, release your shoulder, now release your hip, release into monkey. And that's all very nice. It gives us a nice floaty feeling, and it gives a tremendous sense of ease. But what Miss Goldie's point is that it loses muscle tone. And she wanted it to build muscle tone. So let's actually do a very quick game straight away. If you're up for this, I want you to lift your shoulder and then just think, I can do less with my shoulder, or whatever phrase you use. My shoulder can be free, and let it come down again. Just release it. And just notice what that's about. What's that like? And now I want you to lift your shoulder again. And this time, I don't want you to release it. I want you to think, I can do less with my shoulder. I can do less with my shoulder. I can do less with my shoulder. And just keep thinking your phrase over and over and over again. I can do less with my shoulder. And notice what happens. And the shoulder will eventually want to put itself back into place. I can do less with my shoulder, but let it do itself rather than you doing it for it. So just keep saying, I can do less with my shoulder. 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 Let it organize itself. I can do less with my shoulder. I can do less with my shoulder. Okay. Everybody back to where we started, nearly. As Leo's is still slightly up, that's it. Just, I can do less with my shoulder. I can do less with my shoulder. Now, what's the difference? Can anyone tell me what the difference is between the first time and the second time? Jonathan.
Well, I notice this is my old physio hat on, the sort of eccentric muscle control was much more clunky in a sort of stepped way as things reorganized. So that was my observation. That's it. Yeah.
So it was the eccentric was clunkier the first time or the second time?
The second time. The first time was just a sort of whoosh.
Yes, yes. But
very passive.
Very passive, that's right. So which ended up with more eccentric tone overall, do you think? The first time or the second?
The second.
Yeah, yeah. So there's more eccentric tone, there's more balance of muscle tone. Thank you. Katri, do you want to add something?
Well, there was more connection on the second time. That the first time was much more kind of losing my structure almost, like with the sudden movement, and then almost like being forced to find it again afterwards. Meanwhile, when you asked us to do less and less, it all stayed connected.
Yes, yes, yes. So even though one is doing less, muscles are coming into play that weren't in play before. Yeah. Anyone else like to add to this discovery process? Leslie?
Well, for me, my breathing changed completely.
Nice, nice.
So doing it the first time, it was a physicality, it was a serious doing, and a lot of added in use, if that makes sense. And by just doing less, allowed a breath to come, which that set off the release mechanism, if that makes sense.
Yes.
So now, because I'm recovering from an accident, so actually I'm quite not the best, in the best physical state that I could be in. But what I'm noticing now that we've just gone through that is that my right shoulder, which was the one that I just did the little game with, is sitting in a very different way to the other one.
Yes, yes. And it's interesting because what you brought in then was the torso allowed itself to reorganize itself as well.
Yeah.
And is that right shoulder now more supported on the torso than the left one?
Well, now you've used those words, yes.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yes,
So
this one feels as if it's sort of suspended somewhere, but it's not actually anywhere.
Yeah, absolutely. And this again is something Goldie used to talk to me about, that the torso needs to be really alive and in order to support the shoulders. And that when we just release the shoulders, we actually do collapse the back to an extent. And that doesn't help us.
Makes sense.
Yeah. And great discovery. Andre.
Yes, on the same theme about releasing the shoulder, to me it's very much the same saying release the shoulder or do less. What helps me here is another angle to think that the shoulder begins actually at the clavicle.
Yes. Yes.
And that is very helpful. And then I can, after that, this realization, my torso readjusts to the lengths, appropriate lengths, and everything hangs loosely. Yeah.
Yes. Thank you.
That's. I wanted that could you please anatomically explain this thing about this shoulder beginning in the clavicle area, because it's not every teacher covers that.
Oh, it's so important. It's so important because we don't think about, how the shoulder connects to the body. And it really does only connect there. And if you find the top of the sternum and waggle your clavicle back, waggle your shoulder backwards and forwards, you find the sternoclavicular joint. And it's such a small joint, and that is the only physical point of connection through the skeleton of the shoulder girdle and the arms. It's such a fine connection.
But we have two clavicles. Do we have two joints there, or what?
Well, there's one that side and one that side. So yes, there's one for that side and one for that side. Yeah. And then the next joint is this rather complicated one, isn't it? That the clavicle then joins to the scapula, and then the arm joins into that joint that's then created at the top there on the scapula. But it's I mean, we have the most flexible arms of any animal in the animal kingdom, because this very fluid process, and because we're not having to be weight bearing. But, you know, look at what gymnasts can do. You know, they can 1 second be putting their total weight through their shoulders in a handstand, and the next moment be swinging round the bar and be taking their total weight in a hanging way. And the shoulder is incredibly flexible. And this is where tensegrity comes in, that the whole thing, if you think like a bicycle wheel, because you know, a bicycle wheel, the spokes, it's a very fine thing, isn't it? But the spokes are all tensioned into the rim, and the whole thing, it's an interplay of tensional elements. And there's a tensegrity structure. And what we just found with that little game is the complete sort of tensegrity of the shoulder girdle that then can be that can look after itself on top of the rib cage, which can look after itself. So the rib cage looks after itself with the breathing, as Leslie discovered, and then the shoulder girdle has its own tensional elements, and that can sit on top. And that then gives us a freedom to move. Now, Goldie couldn't have explained it like that, but that's very much what she was teaching. Does that strike chords for people? Is this? So I think learning the anatomy is actually very important, but only if we learn it in this functional way of how things join up. As I say, itsy bitsy anatomy, because it's only functional anatomy that explains posture and the postural control that we need. And when I use posture, I mean, you know, how we sustain ourselves as we reach for a cup of tea. You know, it may be the bicep that's lifting the cup, but it's this postural mechanism that actually is adjusting finally all the time as I lift the cup, because the whole thing links everything to everything. And we need this functional anatomy to explain that. And Jando's pulls then work out of that. So this first pull, for instance, the pull to the elbow, and I won't go through one with you today, but one is opening out all the way across that back line, because for most people that's really quite constricted. And so one's just opening out the back. It's a very powerful way of opening out one's own upper back and lifting the upper back, because many people are like that. It opens it and lifts it and brings one more on top of yourself. And when that happens, you get much more length in the spine and width. And when you're sustaining that length with tone, then you get springiness. Then you get the bounce that kids have. And how does that sound? Does this start to make sense, Andre? Yeah, and that's very much what she's doing. Let's do a quick pull. Let's just have a go. Just stand up. And let's just try it to start with by bouncing up and down and see how your bounce is spent away. And if you can't do a full bounce, then just, you know, maybe do a little stationary bounce. But whatever way bouncing is comfortable for you, if you can do the full bounce, that's good. Okay. Now let's come back to standing, and let's just take a finger into your elbow and just poke it out. That's it. So we're getting that sensation as if somebody else is taking your arm. So I just put my finger into the crux of my elbow there. That's it. There we go. And I'm just poking it out. And the shoulder is quite free, isn't it? And so the shoulder is, the arm is going out. It's not letting the shoulder lift up. We're not letting that happen. And also put a slight turn on it. Slight turn forwards, which can feel a bit odd. If you didn't do the out, you'd do that, but we're not doing that. We're coming out and round. Now, let's see if we can get the elbow to do that for itself. So you're going to imagine there's a string on the elbow, and that string is going to pull your elbow out and slightly forwards and keeping it down, not letting it lift into the shoulder. Okay, that's good. That's one arm. And let's just do the other arm. So let's get that sense that the arm can move out without any tightening in the shoulder. The arm just, the lower arm just hangs down. Make sure it's not moving up into the shoulder joint, it's coming out of it, and give it a slight twist forwards. Slight twist forwards, that's it. That's it. Okay, and then find that string, let the arm find it for itself. So we're waking up the extensors here. The triceps, you might feel your triceps giving a pull, and the triceps is now exerting a lengthening on the arm. And let's do both together. Let those elbows, those string to the elbow, both pull out together. Now, just observe your breathing. Are you aware of your shoulder blades moving apart more than they were? There's a stretch now. Across the triceps, across the shoulder cuff, the rotator cuff muscles, across the rhomboids, across the other side, down to that one. And you're giving your whole upper back a bit of a stretch. And what's the breathing like now? Anyone like to say what this feels like? Yeah, so Leslie?
It opens it up.
It opens it up, yeah. Anyone else finding that it's opening up the back of the breath? Okay. And now let's test it by letting it lower down very gently again and just try another bounce. Anyone bouncing higher or more easily than they did before?
Or higher. Yeah.
Higher, nice. Yeah. So anyone else like to comment on what happened there? This is where people go shy. Anyone have a comment?
I think it's quite difficult to spot the difference. Actually, are we saying that as we lift the shoulders higher up and forward, that the breathing is coming higher up into upper chest rather than the lower chest?
No, not, because the last thing we want is the breath there. We want, most people, there's more lung tissue in the back than the front. We want the back to open. Katri.
2 observations. I'm more aware of the whole back side of myself, that it opens up the spacious awareness behind me.
Fantastic.
And then another thing, I observe blood circulation activating.
Nice.
On my arms especially.
Yeah. Yes. I think this is actually very good for the heart, to open the back space in this way. I think really supports the heart. That's my own observation. So it's interesting you said that. Yeah. Anyone else like to comment on what happened? I mean, we went through that very fast. I mean, if I was doing this properly in the book study club, we'd take a whole session on this. So, you know, did anyone else get something from this? Or was it all a bit too fast to notice?
Basically, which page is it on? Because I don't have directly access to the book, but I have a friend who has the book, so I will follow it up.
Well, it's a mixture of we start on this work in chapter 7, so it's lesson 2 of lesson 3 of chapter 7, but also the pull to the elbow is in chapter 9, and that's on page 184. So I've sort of put the two together because I now actually recommend people read that the start of chapter 9 first, because it goes through the anatomy. And I think when one is clear of the anatomy, it's easier to find the pull. So yeah, have fun with that.
Thank you.
Okay, so yeah, I mean, some people find these pulls straight away. Some people, it takes a while to find exactly the right lines and to find that the angle of pull to get what's happening, and we can play around. And we haven't worked with breathing first, which of course helps. Jonathan, how did you find it? What were you aware of?
It's early days for me in terms of any kind of vigor.
Sure, yeah.
And I did get the widening, opening behind.
Yes.
And also I was slightly confused as to whether the arms were in internal or external rotation. So rotating forward for me is that. So it took me a moment to understand the physicality of that. But actually I quite like that. It's because I'm quite muscular in my arms, what I notice is the sort of stretch on the nerves, stretch on the fascia, if that makes sense.
Yes.
It's a very fascia activity for me.
Yes, absolutely. Because again, what we're all doing is we all overuse the flexors of the arm, and this brings the extensors back into play and begins to rebalance the arms. And so that's why it's so important. And that's what most of these pulls are doing, are working on the extensors and taking us out of overuse of the quads or overuse of the belly muscles and overuse of the rectus abdominis, taking us out of that overuse of flexors, getting the extensors going, which again, and it's the extensors, which are those anti-gravity muscles. And Jandot feels, and I don't know whether he's right or not, that Alexander must have used things like this for himself to start with in order to, you know, to get things going for himself, because how does he do a pull for the elbow on someone else if he hasn't first discovered how to do it for himself? And I think there's a whole, I think there's evidence that he's right from the Delsart connection. So, but I'm researching that more at the moment. I'll be putting something out on that in not too long, trying to back up what I'm saying historically. I'm actually writing a revised history at the moment, a new look at the history of how the technique evolved, putting all this together and trying to actually see what evidence we actually do have for the hypotheses I put in the book. Sometimes the history chapter isn't quite spot on, so I'm really taking a detailed look at it at the moment. So yeah, so I call the book The 12 Fundamentals, and because I'll just show you the 12 fundamentals that are in the book. Can you see that?
Yeah.
Yeah. So it works out very nicely as a sort of crystal. Here's the physical fundamentals, and then we've got consciousness fundamentals, and we've got sensory fundamentals. And the physical fundamentals, here's the tensegrity stuff, the fascial continuity, which is the baseline organization of the body. And then you've got the kinetic chains, the muscle groups, the myofascial links, which is how the whole structure self-organizes with gravity and other forces, which is the biomechanics, if you were. And then if everything wasn't in spirals, we wouldn't be able to move. Everything is in spirals. So you've got this spiral arrangement. And when you put those three together, you have a functional body that will morph into movement like a puppet. But there's no consciousness there, and it won't move without consciousness, and neither can it move without sensory input. So the sensory fundamentals are this exteroception, you know, the eyes, ears, the reception of the outside world, eyes, ears, taste, touch, smell. And then proprioception, which we all know, the awareness of where the body is in space and what it's doing relative to itself. And then interoception, which is the one we tend to forget, which is our internal desires, because we move because we're thirsty, or hungry, or we want to mate, or we want to get away from danger. And that's interoception, that the drive to survive. And when you put those three together, I think what you get is spatial awareness and awareness of ourselves in our environment, which is that coming into relationship thing I talked about, which is crucial. And I don't think has been enough talked about in the technique. And then the consciousness fundamentals. We need a calm nervous system. And there's a lot of talk nowadays about the polyvagal system, the need to be in calm, because only in calm are we aware, we're self-aware, and without self-awareness, we don't get very far. And also we're open to learning when we're in that calm place. So it's crucial to our work to be in that calm place, which is why Goldie talks so much about come to quiet, so that one's whole nervous system becomes receptive to change. And then this was one she gave me, mind in the brain. The idea that, you know, if we're over involved with the body, then again, we're over involved, we need to separate, to have this sense of separation between the thinking and the body. Now, it is a psychophysical unity, but at the same time, there's a separation there. So there's a paradox there. And then along with that, we also need embodiment and embodied intelligence, that, you know, being with the intelligence of the knees or whatever. And when you put those three together, then you can make an embodied conscious choice. I am going to walk to the fridge and I am going to get some cheese out of it to make a sandwich. And that gives a focus of intent to the movement. And then when you put those three together, then you get my kettle moment. You get an integrated movement that is in relation to life. Because again, if we just sort of sit there thinking I free my neck, it's not relative to anything. And this is a point Marjorie Barlow makes over and over again. You know, Alexander worked through movement. He thought these directions and then he moved. He didn't just sit and think. He took, it's through movement that the change happens. Does anyone want to talk about that before we go any further? Ken, you're muted. Can you unmute?
Yeah, hi. When you say the kettle movement, you picked up the kettle and stuff like that, how is this sense of not doing the movement? Like, did the arm pick up the kettle by itself?
Yes.
Intention type of thing, or not intention, like your command from the brain, if you know what I mean.
Have you ever walked past a shelf, knocked something off and caught it before you're aware that you've knocked it off?
I have, yeah, I've probably done something like that, if you know what I mean. Yeah.
Like that, where we somehow, the movement somehow organizes itself without us being conscious of it. Parking the car, if we think too hard about parking the car, we can't do it, can we? We have to just somehow trust that we can park the car.
Right.
And so it's that quality of letting the body organize itself, and it can, and then it surprises you, and you've gone past this shelf and you think, how come my toothbrush is in my hand? Or whatever it is that sort of, it almost takes you by surprise, if that makes sense. So you're really staying out of the way and letting the movement organize itself. Now, I did give the volitional consent to move that hand, but I stayed out of the way of it. And that's the difference. And I was talking to a concert pianist once, and he said, sometimes I look down at my hands rampaging up and down the keys and think, whose hands are those? And yet, obviously, his musical intelligence is organizing the hands, but it's stepped outside that overdoing control. Does that make sense?
Yes, that makes sense. I'm trying to think of the name now. Missy Vine.
Missy Vineyard, she teaches the same thing.
She's saying the same thing, but I sat there. I thought, how long? Okay, I want to move my knee, but I'm not moving my knee. I never move. It never moved.
Yes. My games for it are slightly more accessible.
All right.
Yeah, because that one, it's people can get tangled on that one.
All right. Okay.
Yeah, I have different games, but it's funny. She and I are really on the same wavelength in many ways. Andre.
Yeah, a question about traditional, not very popular word in IT, stopping.
Yes.
Now, when you said about the schedule process, you basically need to stop to before you reach out for the schedule. Now, in that moment of stopping, you organize yourself. So everything which you've been talking about is, in a way, more available to you if you stop before you reach out.
Yes, and I'm going to clarify that a bit, because stop can be seen as a stop-go process, like traffic lights. Now I stop, now I go. Whereas actually it's more than that. The stop is bringing one to this state of quiet, in which inhibition is actually in a different way. Tim Cacciatore calls it tonic inhibition. It becomes a living state. So if I'm juggling, I might stop before I start the juggling process, just to allow that state of quiet to come into being. But once I'm going, my game is to keep that state of quiet as an ongoing process, so that I can't stop. Once that juggling begins, I can't stop, but I can maintain the state of quiet. Does that make sense? And that's what Goldie was teaching. It wasn't the stop-go sort of inhibition that a lot of us learned. Now you're going to go in the chair. Nope, you did it wrong, stop. Which sort of very much feeds into wrong and right. It's bringing this state of awareness so that you step outside of wrong and right. You step outside of faulty sensory perception and you move outside that. It's a very different process, and it's great the way it steps out of wrong and right, and it becomes much more of an exploratory observing process. How does that sound?
Well, yeah, it makes sense. But again, it will take time for me, for example, to start practicing it, because it takes time. And that's what we hope to kind of get, maybe in lessons with you directly, even over the on the internet. That would be kind of type of exercises which I would really enjoy doing.
Yes. So that's why I formed the book study club, because the book, there is so much that was different of Miss Goldie's work. The thinking process was different. The organizational process was different. The biomechanics is different. And it's not learnt overnight. So, and for those of you who haven't seen the book, there's a lot of it. 18 chapters and 200 explorations. And so in the book study club, we work through it week by week. Well, we do sessions fortnightly. Every 2 weeks we do the sessions, and we just take it chapter by chapter. And in fact, we only take a bit of a chapter each time. So it takes, well, at the moment, it's taking a bit over a year to go through the whole book, but what's happening with that is people are really taking time to work on each bit, to integrate each bit before we go on to the next bit. And then the people who are now, as one of the first groups now at chapter 15, and they're up to 16, they look so different than they did at the start. and they're telling me their bodies are stronger and springier. They're feeling much more in connection with their lives. Their stress levels are down, their feet are different, their balance are different. I mean, there's all sorts of things that have happened for them along the way, which is wonderful.
So can one join on it anytime?
Yes, well, the new group will start on the 3rd of October, which is not this Monday coming, but the following Monday. And the sessions will be, the seminars will be at 2 o'clock UK time. So I think for you, Andre, in South Africa, that's 3 o'clock, isn't it? I think South Africa's
Yeah, thank you.
is-
That's perfect time. Perfect time.
Good, good. Yes.
You can choose any day you want.
Right, you are retired. Nice. So yeah, and then we go 2 weeks from there, and every session is recorded. So people who can't make the time can follow on the recording. And some people I never get to meet at all because they're in Australia or Korea or Japan, and I never do see them. But everybody has a study buddy. We match everybody up in the first session with somebody that they can, you know, work with on their time zone and in their language. I try and get the Germans matched with Germans and so on. And thank you, Jonathan. Really nice to see you. Yeah. All the best. Yes, so with the study buddy, you get together online, unless you happen to be in the same town, hopefully every week, and you first read the bit of the book that we're going through and played with the explorations yourself, just to see what's in there and how much you understand it. And then you get together with your buddy, and one of you plays teacher and the other plays pupil, and the one who's teacher talks the other one through the exploration. And so you take it in turns to be receiver and giver. And not merely do you get a much deeper idea of how the exploration works, but as a teacher, you learn to language it, because, you know, the way most of us were trained is, you know, you get your hands on and you feel it out, and then, you know, from time to time you say something. Whereas this way, you have to be much more clear. I think it's a great discipline, online work, because you really have to be clear about what you want your pupil to do. And that means you have to observe them in quite detail, in a way that very often we haven't learned to do unless we've been through a Marjorie Barstow training, where they learn observation, I think, much more than the stat-based trainings, just to make a broad generality, which may not be true for everybody. So you're learning to language it, and then you're also learning to get the pupil to feed back to you, because again, that's something that wasn't done in the old days, I don't think. Because, you know, something happens with, you take somebody through a neck freeing process and you say to your pupil, well, how was that? And they go, And you say, yes, tell me more. It was nice. Yes. And what happened? Oh, my neck feels longer. Ha. And by getting pupils to verbalize for themselves what happened, that again is a very powerful way for pupils to consolidate what they've learned. And then they're much more likely to be able to go away, not to look for the length, but they've more awareness of the neck, more awareness of what's happening. And then when they next go through the process for themselves, they've just got more sense of what might be happening. Yeah, how does that sound? And then we all get together, of course, in the seminar then.
Okay. So
And I take us through everything together.
yeah.
Yeah.
If my body mate, or you call it,
Yes.
is in London and I'm in Cape Town, is it possible to?
Oh, absolutely. Yes. 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 Oh, yes. We have some most unlikely partnerships going on in some of the clubs. It's just a question of what time zone works, you know. So, you know, there are people working their 10 at night to somebody else's 7 in the morning. Well, probably not that one. 7 at night to 8 in the morning. So you find a buddy that can work with your time zones. Yeah, not a problem. That's the beauty of online. Yeah, so then we get together in the sessions and we talk about what happened, and we talk through problems that happened, and hear how people maybe have tried it out with a pupil, and maybe they've got a problem with a pupil. So there's lots of feedback for teachers. And then I actually lead people through every exploration myself in the session. And we really check that people are really doing it well. And through that, often we make further discoveries between us. And so it's a very living process. And some of the explorations in the book have been tweaked a bit along the way to be even more accessible and access more whole body in them and so on. So it's very much a crucible of exploration together. And the groups are get very bonded, which is why once the group starts, I then don't let anyone else in, because we work through it together. We go on a journey together, which is into the unknown. That was another of Goldie's phrases, is, you know, we need to know how to go into the unknown. So it's a wonderful process. Any more questions? Katri, you're looking like you've got a question poised. I don't know whether you have.
Today we have 2 different times when one can attend, but with the book club, it's only once per day.
Yes. Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
And then would the reading be organized in a way that we read in advance and then get together? Or
that's the idea. Yes.
Yes, right.
Yes, you read in advance. You also have a play in it in advance, so that you make your own discoveries, and then we get together and refine the understanding and talk through the difficulties and so on. Yeah.
So
how has it?
So,
Katrin first. Yes, Katrin.
How has it been with the studying buddies? Like, for example, sometimes not everybody can be available for doing the explorations, but then, yeah, maybe they just get organized by themselves. And what's your experience?
Yes, I mean, I think every partnership finds their own way of working. I mean, there's a couple of men who actually meet every day, which I'm just gobsmacked at. But most people don't. Most people meet once a week. Some people meet fortnightly. Some people have busy schedules and they only get together every so often. And because it is on recording, sometimes people fall behind, and they are actually going along at their own pace behind the scenes. And sometimes they come to seminars anyway, and even though they're a bit behind, and they can ask questions, and you know, so it's actually a very fluid process. And people work it how they need. And there's a couple of quite serious dyslexics in the groups, who again find their own way of, you know, working with written material, and often have a buddy who's, you know, not dyslexic but understands it, so that they can talk them through it more easily. People work in different languages. There's lots of help for Germans, because there's lots of Germans involved. But yeah, hopefully, and also if you have a friend who comes on, then you can come in with your study buddy, you know, already lined up. So that's what some people do, is they come in a pair. People on training courses quite often do that. They come in with a fellow trainee. Yeah, and for pupils, people who aren't trained, we can put pupils together to explore it together, but I usually recommend that a pupil goes with a teacher as a practice pupil, so that rather than expecting pupils to talk somebody else through it, you get talked through it and you get guidance, because it's always good for teachers who really want to learn how to take it into their own practice to have a practice pupil. So that can really work for the people who are pupils. If somebody is really sort of keying up to train, then they can go in as a trainee if they want. And people again can take their own path on that one. So it's very fluid. You know, there's
One more question.
Yes,
Like
please.
how big has been the previous book club attendees approximately?
Oh, I mean, the last club, it started off as, I think there were 56 to start with, but it very, very quickly, you know, a lot of people very quickly go to working behind the scenes. They come to the first meeting and then they say, actually, I always work on that Monday afternoon. And so they go to working behind the scenes. And so very quickly we get groups that are actually between sort of 10 and 15, which is very manageable. And as the year goes on, we really get the core group who are the ones who come to seminars, and other people are there working behind the scenes, and we see them from time to time. So it might start like a forbiddingly big group, but and I don't know how many will join this time, but it doesn't stay there. So how does that sound?
Sounds like real life, that how things usually
Yes,
happen.
absolutely, exactly. So we end up with a very supportive core group who then, in a sense, are being the voices for everybody else. Yeah. Andre, you had some other questions.
Well, I just want to know, how do we join that? And so I need some information about the cost and
Yes. So
link.
the cost I keep right down. So rather than a one-off big fee, we just make it €25 a month, a subscription fee, €25 a month. And for those for who 25 is a bit of a stretch, you can even do it for 20. So there's a helping hand price for those who can't manage the 25. And that's also open-ended because we don't actually know how long each group takes to finish the book. And so the subscription carries on until we finish the book. But there's no upfront commitment. And so if halfway through your life goes upside down and you need to drop out, that's fine. Or if you discover that this way of learning really isn't for you and it doesn't feel right, then you can drop out and there's no problem. So I've made it very affordable. And I will send everybody the link afterwards to the landing page. The background material for the group is on a platform called Thinkific. It's one of these online course platforms. And so on the Thinkific platform, there's the introductory survey, and there's a lot of anatomy pictures up there. There's anatomy challenges for those who want to do them. There's quick quizzes as to how well you've understood each chapter, and some longer questionnaires for those who want to go more deeply into it. And there's an option for those who want to, do all that background stuff. And then you can get a certificate of completion. And there's also the option to do a certificate of training in this way of working, where I just, do you an assessment every part of the book, and we just get together for an hour. I give an assessment, but for that, I want people to have worked with a pupil on all of it. And so that's another option. And then the people who've done that are up on my website as accredited teachers in my way of working. So nobody's done that from the book study club so far. Quite a few people have done it from the previous clubs, which were the online teacher training groups that I ran during COVID, when the book had gone to the publisher, but wasn't yet out. And so I ran courses during COVID, which nobody here came to, but a lot of people did. Any more questions on this?
Good question.
Yeah, yes.
How does the book study club relate to the courses or the video course that seems to be about the book as well? You know what I mean? You see chapter 2, 3, 4, that type of thing.
Yes, the chapter explorations, those are there's 3 of them that I've done. I had intended to do the lot, but time has somehow not been there. So all the explorations for chapter 3, there's longer videos of me talking you through them. And that's, pupils often go for that. And quite a number of teachers buy them as a backup material. The breathing one is particularly popular because doing the breathing from words from the book is often, you know, you're sort of trying to follow an exploration from words, and to have me talking it through is something a lot of people like. So that's what they're adjunct material, if that makes sense. Does that sound right?
Yeah, I suppose I don't know. Yeah, I suppose do people who have done the course get those as well, or on the study book club? Do they generally get?
Some people do. Some people do, particularly the people who feel they need to do a bit more work on their breathing, or a bit more work on the embodiment issues, a bit more work on the part 3 stuff. If they on the chapter 3 stuff, which is precision of what freeing the neck really means, and so on. And so it's just a longer talk through that just gives a little bit more support in those sides. As I say, the breathing one is the one that gets bought most often, so that people can work on breathing in a much deeper way on their own. I use the breathing recordings myself because sometimes it's easier to have somebody talking it through. And yeah, I listen to my own recordings. It's nice to have a recording of a guided meditation, in a sense.
Okay.
Yeah. Leslie.
This may seem a very ignoramus question, but because I talked with Laura, and she showed me from the book, and I'm looking at the book now, the video link for exploration. So is that with my iPhone that
Yes.
You put that on, you scan it?
Yes.
And then it shows up on the phone. Is that right?
That's right. Yes. The QR code's in the book. So people are looking puzzled. I'll lift one up to show you. Find one when I need one.
Page 33.
Thank you.
If that helps you.
There's a little one there. You see that? It's like the sort of thing you get in shops. You know, a little QR code,
Right.
and they're these sort of little magic codes. And for those with a smartphone, you get a QR code scanner. You just download them; they're free, and then you put your phone over it with that program up, and it scans it, and it links you through to a little 2-minute video that's
Right.
on Vimeo. And those are none of them are more than 2 minutes long.
Right.
The ones thank you, Claudia. Nice to see you. The ones that are in the what Ken was asking about, they're longer videos.
Right. So they're separate.
Yeah.
They're a separate thing altogether, which I'm not aware of those. So
oh no, they're on my website. So
okay.
Yeah, and they are also advertised at the beginning of the book.
Right.
And the inside page has that advert, you see, saying that those are there. And I had intended to get all 15 chapters up there, but it hasn't happened yet. Yes, they take a lot of work to do. Yes, the 2-minute code, the 2-minute videos in the book, they move quite fast. They at least show you what you're after. So, for instance, the one of the elbow pull, it just shows you, you know, which way it's going, so that you know it's not going that way, it's going that way, and so on.
Yes.
So they just give you the clue of what you're about, because so much of this, and what I tried to do was do videos for the stuff which will be really unfamiliar to teachers. The stuff that's familiar, I haven't bothered to put stuff in, but I think a lot of it can be counterintuitive and is so different. I tried to put I was so pleased when the publisher said I could do this. I think it's such a great idea to have those. People find them really useful. Yeah. So, any more questions before we finish?
Is it good idea to suggest that you put your website in the chat, maybe? And
in the chat, yes. Let me do that. So my website is Alexander Technique info.org. Alexander Technique Info. Have I spelled that right? I haven't put nothing W. Okay. And if you put my name into Google, but take note of how you spell it, because if you spell it Easton, it won't work, but you've got to spell it East End with no R. And then I'm the only Penelope Easton in the world, as far as I know, which is useful. So I'll come straight up,
Yes.
and you'll find me that way as well. So,
Thank you for that. I'm not getting the difficulty, but this is quite straightforward. Alexander Technique info.org.
.org. Yes. So that's the website, and on the home page you'll find a carousel of boxes, and you'll find the book study club as one of the boxes on that. So you can click on that and it'll take you through to the landing page as well. So, but I say I'll send you the link to it in about half an hour, when it by the time the video is processed along with the recording. You're welcome. So we're going to finish in a second. Any final questions? Caro, Lucia, did you have any questions? You've been
Yes, thank you. I wanted to ask, because I have seen the book club is going to be Mondays.
Yes.
And usually I work on that time. So I just wanted to ask if it is possible to reach out to you if I have questions per mail, maybe, and then you could answer them in the...
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yes, you can always email me. And the other thing we have, for those who like Facebook, there's a Facebook group, and people sometimes put questions in the Facebook group, and then you don't just get my answer, you get other people's answers as well, which is quite fun, and we can get a discussion going around things. And people often put queries with pupils up there, and people brainstorm together how to work with a pupil on an issue. So yes, you can always reach out. Yeah. Thank you. Yeah. Any other questions, at least this year? That and Winston, do you have any questions?
No,
No.
nothing yet.
Yes. And Mario, are you okay there?
Yes, okay.
Yeah.
No
Cornelia.
question.
Yeah. Okay, good. So thank you, everybody. It's been a really nice chat together, a great discussion. And yeah, I hope to see some of you soon in the club. And yeah, looking forward to it. Okay.
Very much, Penelope.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Penelope.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you.
Okay. Bye-bye for now.
Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Bye.